Continue in Maseches Yevamos together. Today's daf is Daf Yud Zayin 17, and we are picking up Emir Hashem on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis 16b. Again, I'm sorry that I can't be there with you in person, but it is such an incredible schos to be able to join you from Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh. So we are beginning again Tes Zayin Amud Beis 16b, and we left off Amar Rabbi Yonasan. It is 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. My dichsiv, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Yado, quoting over here the pasuk from Eicha. Yado paras tsar al kol machmadeha. Literally, again, the enemy stretched out his hand upon machmadeha, all of the precious items. Ze Ammon and Moab. This refers to Ammon and Moab. Shebisha shenichnasu ovdei kochavim laheichol. At the time when our enemies entered into the Beis HaMikdash, in order to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, what happened? Hakol nifnu al kesef v'zov. Everyone turned to the gold and the silver, right? They were there to plunder the riches. So everyone turned for the gold and the silver. V'heim nifnu al Sefer Torah. But Ammon and Moab, they set their sights on destroying the Sefer Torah. Now, why would Ammon and Moab set their sights on destroying the Sefer Torah? And listen to how profound this is. Amru, ultimately, it's fascinating. Ammon and Moab were so incensed, so upset, that the Torah excludes them from joining the Kal Yisrael, from joining Am Yisrael. Remember, again, there are restrictions. When Ammon and Moab convert, there are restrictions about who they're permitted to marry, what generation they're permitted to join. So they were so upset, they decided to go ahead, while everyone else is pillaging and plundering gold and silver, they're destroying the Sefer Torah. Yisarif Ba'ish. Ultimately, again, this Torah should be destroyed in the fire. Tziva Hashem. So we'll say, it's also just an incredible yisod. If you think about it, right? Why are Ammon and Moab excluded? Ammon and Moab aren't excluded because the Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab are excluded. Asher lo kidmu eschem balechem almayim. Number one, because they did not go ahead and greet us with bread and water as we were leaving Egypt. Number two, they hired Bilam ben Ba'ar to go ahead and curse us. So it's fascinating. They're rejected because they did not display basic human kindness towards us. But you know, human nature is that when something goes wrong, our first reaction is to project, or I should say, to deflect. Our first reaction is, okay, whose fault is it? Something went wrong, whose fault is it? It's not my fault, it's not me. Whose fault is it? Instead of sometimes taking the first approach when something doesn't go right in life, something goes wrong, introspecting, did I do something? Did I do something? Could it be that my behaviors in some way caused this cascade of events? Ammon and Moab so incensed that they're rejected. Don't introspect, instead project, deflect onto HaKadosh Baruch Hu, into Am Yisrael, burn the Sefer Torah. Incredible Musar. So the Gemara goes like this. Tziv Hashem Yaakov Sviv Tzarav. So the pasuk over here was once again same pasuk in Eicha. Literally translated, it means Tziv Hashem Yaakov Sviv Tzarav, that Yaakov, Klal Yisrael, will be surrounded by enemies. Amarav kigon Homanya lepum nara. This refers dafka to the Jewish residents of Homanya, which was by Pum Nara. What was unique about these individuals? Rashi says over here, Homanya Yevanim Heim. It was a city that was inhabited by Greeks. And apparently, again, the Jews who lived in Homanya, which was by Pum Nara, they were terribly afflicted by the Greeks. Okay? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Yasi, Oved kochav mishekidish bezmanazeh chosheshem lekidushav kidushin shema me'aseres hashvatim hu. Incredible Gemara. So Rav Yasi says, if a non-Jew, a Gentile, an Oved kochav, an idolater, is mekadesh a Jewish woman in these times, gives kiddushin to a Jewish woman, we have to be choshesh that it's a valid kiddushin. We have to be concerned that it's a valid kiddushin, it's a valid betrothal. How could that be? So we'll say, this is wild. We're choshesh, we're concerned that perhaps he's one of the 10 lost tribes. Perhaps one of the 10 tribes, and therefore perhaps he's really a Yid, he's really a Jew, and therefore his kiddushin is a good kiddushin. So the Gemara says, really? V'ha called the parshim ru parshim. Also, we have a general concept in halacha that ultimately, again, when you have something in front of us, right, something that is separated from the collective, something in front of us now, we generally judge it that it came from the majority. So on a simple level, when you have a person who comes and it betroths a Jewish woman, if you don't know him to be Jewish, you have to assume that he's separated from the vast majority of the world. And the vast majority of the world, as you may have noticed, is not Jewish. Is not Jewish. So kol de parsh, whatever comes out from the collective, by definition, has to be judged based on the rov, based on the majority. So why would you assume that if a person who we know to be non-Jewish is mekadesh a Jewish woman, that she would be choshesh for that kiddushin? Why not just more generally assume that Allah Lamaisi is not Jewish? To which the Gemara says, beduchta dikvi. No, we're talking about a place where it was known that the 10 tribes had settled there. Look at Rashi, last Rashi in the Daf. Beduchto dekvi, b'nei asaras hashvatim, v'chol kavua kamechza mechzadami, v'heichel kivi. So the idea over here is we're talking about an area where we know, we're going to get into this in just a moment, that the 10 tribes had settled at some point in their journeys. So we're concerned that perhaps over time, the Jews who had settled there, the 10 tribes, the remnant of the 10 tribes, became assimilated. So there's a concern that perhaps one of these people here, when he's Mekadesh a woman, is in fact a Jew, and therefore his Kiddushin ultimately is a valid Kiddushin. Kiddushin is a valid Kiddushin. So that this is the Abdurrose of Kol Kavua Kamechza Mechza Dami. When something is found in its place, so then ultimately we consider that to be a 50-50 chance. So without getting into the technicalities of this, the paradigmatic case of this is you have 9 stores that sell you have 9 stores that sell non-kosher meat, 1 store that sells kosher meat. If you go ahead and you find a piece of meat in the street, you go after the rove. You say, kol de parsh, whatever came from, whatever was extracted from its original location is assumed to come from the majority. But ultimately, if you walked into a store, that might be a little bit different. That's called kol kavua kamechza mechzadami. Whenever you go into a location where something at some point in time was anchored, then we don't look at that as a rove, we look at that as 50-50. Without getting into the halachic technicalities, the idea that the Gemara essentially says is we're talking about regions where we know the 10 tribes had inhabited. They lived there. And we also know that there was assimilation. So if a non-Jew from one of these areas is Mekadesh, a woman, the Gemara suggests you have to be concerned that perhaps he's really a Jew, and therefore maybe the Kiddushin is a good Kiddushin. Shabbos said the Gemara now discusses where were these places where the 10 tribes inhabited. So the Gemara says, the Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, pasuk over here that the Gemara quotes from Sefer Melachim. The pasuk says, "Vayanchem bachlach ubechavar nar gozon va'adei madai, va'arei madai." So the Gemara goes through each of these places. Chalach zechilazon. This is the place of Chilazon. Chabur, what's Chabur? Chabur, top of Yud Zayin, Zechadyab. This is the city of Chadyab. Nar Gozen, Zeginzok. Nar Gozen is Ginzok. Va'arei madai, zu Chamdon v'chavroseha. And the cities of Madai, this refers to Chamdon and its surrounding cities. So the Gemara goes right to Va'armilei, zu Ginzok v'chavroseha. Others say it's Ginzak and its surrounding areas. Okay, I'm sorry. Va'armilei zu nihar v'chavroseha. I'm sorry. So Chamdan, sorry. Va'armilei zu nihar v'chavroseha. Ultimately, some say it's Nihar and its surrounding cities. So the Gemara says, Chavroseha man, what are the surrounding cities? Amushmo, Krach, Mushchi, Chitki, Vidumakyo. Okay, so these were all places that were meaningful. They knew these particular places, and they knew that halacha l'maisa, the 10 tribes were settled in these areas. So when we say that if a non-Jewish man is Mekadesh woman, you have to be concerned that perhaps he's Jewish, it doesn't mean in the Welt, in general, but rather it means in these specific areas. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, v'chulan lifsal. Interestingly enough, the Gemara says, by the way, it's a big problem because the truth is we're actually concerned about mamzerus. This goes back to yesterday's daf a little bit, that kind of where there's assimilation and a general erosion of halacha and specifically marital law and divorce. That's where we get into significant mamzerus concerns. And Rashi says over here, Lifsol ruban mamzerim shenitnu aseres hashvatim ba'ovdos kochavim Ubenehem harihen ki Yisraelim v'noagin bam iser mamzerus v'hein lo nisaru v'nisu ze'achos sa'obito v'hein mamzer. So Rashi points out over here that again, in general, there was assimilation, intermarriage, lack of understanding of halacha, of course, and therefore all of this kind of creates a big mamzerus challenge. So therefore you have to be concerned with mamzerus that comes out of these places. Ki amrise kamei de Shmuel. When I said this before, Shmuel said as follows: Amrlei, bincha haba mine Yisraelis karei bincha. You know, at the end of the day, when a non-Jewish man fathers a child with a Jewish woman, ultimately that child is called your child, which is another way of saying that that child is Jewish. That child is Jewish. Ve'im bincha haba mine avedas kochavim karei bincha. But conversely, if a Jewish man fathers a child with a non-Jewish woman, ultimately that child is not called your child, i.e., that child is not Jewish. Elabino. Rather, again, quote unquote, it's her child. So here's what's interesting. What the Gemara is just pointing out over here is, I don't understand. At the end of the day, why are we concerned? Why are we concerned for any level of mamzerus? If halacha l'maisa, people intermarried, so don't we assume just at a certain point in time everybody's not Jewish? To which the Gemara says, "V'ha'ika banos." Okay, but what about the girls? In other words, that's fine. In other words, halacha l'maisa, you could say if the men intermarry, there's no problem of mamzerus because ultimately everyone just becomes not Jewish. What about the women? Rashi says over here, banos shenishbu v'nisum ovdei kochavim bolidu mehem. What about the Jewish women who were taken captive? We saw in yesterday's daf who were violated, taken captive, ultimately marry non-Jewish men. They have children. Those children are Jewish. But the Gemara says something amazing. V'amar Ravina, Shmamina ben bitcha abamina ovei kochavim kari bincha. So, and we learned that halacha l'maisa, when a non-Jewish woman has a child with a Jewish man, that's a Jewish child. So ultimately, why? So in other words, for the men, I understand from the Jewish men's side, there's no problem of mamzerus because at the end of the day, if you intermarry, that's it. It's the end of the line. Chas v'shalom. But by the women, by the Jewish women, there are Jewish children here. So this is actually a profound Gemara. The Gemara says, "Gemiri debansa dahudara itzdaruye itzdara." Actually, very, very overwhelming. The Gemara says we have a tradition that the women of that generation, of the Aseres Hashvatim, of the 10 tribes, ultimately weren't able to conceive. Why weren't they able to conceive? Rashi says, "Itzdaruye itzdaru nifka rachman miliklot zera v'naasu akaros." Ultimately, again, that Rashi says literally that their womb was uprooted and they became sterile. They were unable to conceive children, which is an overwhelming yesod. What exactly it means, I don't know. But one thing we do know, which is that trauma disrupts the menstrual cycle. And that halacha l'maisa, again, that obviously disrupts the ability to go ahead and conceive. So could it be that on one level, the Chazal are telling us that the exile of the 10 tribes was so dramatic and traumatic for those women that literally it caused almost like across-the-board fertility issues? I don't know, perhaps that's what the Gemara is saying, but Lamaisa, the Gemara is telling us that we have a tradition that those women just didn't conceive, which tragically means that those families stopped at that generation. Therefore, again, the issue at play is really one of men intermarrying. Ike de Amri, others have a different version of this. Ki Amrisa kamei de Shmuel, Amar le lo zazu misham, so the Gemara says another tradition we have is that halacha l'maisa, they did not move from there. In other words, they did not disband the Beis Medrash until they ruled that all of the people of these cities are ovdei kochavim. In other words, what they did was as follows: that essentially through Drisha v'Chakira, right, through analyzing the situation, they came to the halachic conclusion that essentially the 10 tribes have disappeared. And unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, and therefore again, the people from these particular cities. Now again, does it mean that there aren't remnants of the 10 tribes elsewhere, that there are survivors of the 10 tribes? It's certainly possible, What it's saying, the Gemara is saying, is that the people of these particular cities that we're talking about, they're not Jewish. These are ovdei kochavim, these are non-Jews, and therefore again, if one of these men were to be makadesh a Jewish woman, halacha l'maisa, the kiddushin would have no validation, and there's no mamzerus issue. They declared them all simply as non-Jews. Shene'emar, ba'ashem bagdu, ki banim zarim yaladu. Quoting over here the pasuk from Hosea. So the Gemara goes right. The Gemara says, Yosef Rav Yosef achori Rav Kana, v'Yosef Rav Kana kamed Rav Yehuda, v'Yosef v'Ka'amar, Asidin Yisrael da'avdi yom hatava ki charvi tarmud. Klal Yisrael will make a yom tiv when the city of TALMUD is destroyed. Now Rashi says over here, Yom HaTava, Mishum de Mamzerim Heim, Umitamim, B'Yisraelu Postan Osan. Apparently the city of TALMUD, as we saw, was filled with Mamzerim. And the problem, of course, was that these individuals would marry regular Jewish women. And of course, when that happens, Rahman al-Islam, it fundamentally uproots and taints the genealogy of Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara says over, Rav Kahana says, it's a strong lashon, Klal Yisrael is going to make a Yom Tov. Now, it seems to be that there was some almost negative motivation on behalf of these residents. Like, in other words, marry in your own city. Marry, right? Mamzerim can marry Mamzerim. I said, marry in your own city. There seemed to be like almost, you feel from the Gemara, that there was like an underlying desire to corrupt the lineage of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, again, Rav Kahana says it'll be a Yom Tiv when the city of TALMUD is destroyed. It's already destroyed. To which the Gemara says, no. Hahi Talmud Havi. That's not Talmud, that's Talmud. Talmud was destroyed. Talmud hasn't been destroyed. Rav Ashi Amar, Hainu Talmud, Hainu Talmud. Rav Ashi says it's the same place. It's the same place. So why do we speak about Talmud being destroyed if it's already been destroyed? To which the Gemara says something very interesting. Osiv mehai gisa. Hainu Talmud, Achpulehu de Michbal. So ultimately, the Gemara says, Achpulehu de Michbal. Rashi says the people of Talmud do something very interesting. Whenever one part of the city is destroyed, they build the other. When that part is destroyed, they rebuild the other. So Ichbal hu de Michbal. Charev mehai gisa, when it's destroyed from this side, Osiv mehai gisa. They rebuild it from that side. Vicharev mehai gisa, Osiv mehai gisa. When they destroy it on this side, they rebuild it from this side. So apparently, again, the people of Talmud are quite resilient. So no matter what happens, they're constantly going ahead and building and rebuilding. So therefore, again, they're always in a partial state of being rebuilt. So it'll be a Yom Tiv when ultimately they are destroyed. So I'll say, first of all, an incredible, the idea is to learn Ezu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam. And what a musar from the people of Talmud. Sometimes what you build gets destroyed. And so often when what we build gets destroyed, unfortunately, we're often miyayish, we just give up. But the goal, of course, in life is when something you build gets destroyed, rebuild it. And sometimes you have to recognize, I can't rebuild it dafka where it was destroyed. I have to rebuild something else. What a musar from the people of Talmud. This part of the city gets destroyed. Apparently they couldn't rebuild that city. They built on the other side. Right? That part got destroyed, they built on the other side. When life destroys that which you have built, find the koach to rebuild. And even if you can't rebuild that which you had built before, so even if you can't rebuild exactly that which has been destroyed, find the koach to build something else. Ezu chacham alomed mikol adam, even from the mamzerim of Talmud. Incredible. So Rav Hamnuna was sitting in front of Ula. V'kahavi b'shmaita. And ultimately, again, they were learning together. Now, literally, Kavi B'Shmaita means that Ula was challenging his learning, right? So Rav Hamnuna was presenting something in front of Ula, and ultimately, again, it was being challenged. So so Ula said, Ma Gavra, what a man. This Rav Hamnuna, what a Talmud Chacham. How absolutely incredible. Uma Gavra ilab the Harpanya Maseh. And how great would he be had he not come from the city of Harpanya? So apparently Harpanya was another city that had a big mamzerus issue. So Ula was saying, this guy Rav Hamnuna, he's absolutely incredible. Right? Absolutely incredible. But if only he didn't come from Harpanya. Ichsif, Rav Hamnuna was embarrassed, understandably so, because Ula was kind of saying, listen, you're great, but you're not that great because you come from Harpanya. Amrle, so Ula saw that he was depressed. Amrle, Kesev gal golasa lehechi yavis. Tell me, where do you pay your head tax to? What city do you pay your head tax to? Amrle the Pumnara. He said, I pay my head tax to the municipality of Pumnara. Amrle imkain mi Pumnara at. If that's the case, you are from wherever you pay your taxes to. It's a good lesson, right? So therefore, you pay your taxes to Pumnara. You're really from Pumnara. Good news, you're not from Harpanya. To which the Gemara says, by the way, my Harpanya, what's so bad about Harpanya? I'm Rabbi Zera, Har Shakol Ponin Bo. It is a mountain that everyone turns to. Now Rashi says over here, Shakol Ponin Bo, Kol Apsulin Shein Motzin Isha Ponin Baholkin Shan. Anyone who is genealogically unfit, comes to Harpanya for a shidduch. So it's a place where you have many people with genealogical blemishes and difficulties. Or Tana, Kol She'ein Makir Mishpachto V'Shivto Nifne L'Sham. Or it was anyone who doesn't know their tribe or doesn't know their family affiliation goes to Harpanya. So the point over here is that it is a place made up of primarily people who are genealogically blemished. So therefore, again, which also will say is such an incredible. So the Gemara says V'Hiamuk Amarava V'Hiamuk Mishal, that Harpanya is even deeper than Gehenna. Then Gehenna, Shneimar, Miyad Sha'ol Iftei Mimaves Egalim. The pasuk says that I will redeem them from Sha'ol. I will save them from death. Vilu psul dido les lutakanta. Yet ultimately, again, halacha lemaisa. So you can be saved from Gehenna, but you can't really be saved from genealogical unfitness, right? Once you have mamzerus, unfortunately, it remains. So psulei de harpanya, mishum psulei de mishan. So I'll just point out something amazing over here. In that exchange between Ula and Rav Hamnuna, what you also see is something fantastic, which is the effect that your surroundings have on you. See, here you have Rav Ula being so impressed with the Torah of Rav Hamnuna, but yet being so sad that Rav Hamnuna is from Harpanya. So you say to yourself, but who cares where he's from? Lemaisa, again, he's Rav Hamnuna, he's giving over this beautiful Torah. Because where you come from, and more importantly, the circumstances or the influences which you surround yourself with have an effect on who you are. We like to think that our surroundings don't affect us. We like to think that kind of who I surround myself with, where I allow myself to be, won't have such a residual effect on my neshama. But it's blatantly false, profoundly untrue. Everything has an effect on who and what we are, to the point that you even have Ula saying, you're such a great Talmud Chacham, Nebuch, but the fact that you're from Harpanya, that imprinted, that has an effect on you in some way. An incredible yisod. The Gemara ends off by saying, the Gemara says, good. So the Gemara just says, by the way, the psulim, right? Those who are genealogically unfit from in Harpanya, they originally came from Mishan, right? Psulei de Mishan, Mishum Psulei de Talmud. The people from Mishan originally were from Talmud. Psulei de Talmud, Mishum Avdei Shlomo. The genealogical unfitness of Talmud came originally from the servants of Shlomo. That was yesterday's daf. The very wealthy servants of Shlomo who married Jewish women. So it's amazing. So interestingly enough, all of these places all originate in the same problem, which is Avdei Shlomo. So that cohort who created this genealogical unfitness kind of moved place to place to place. This is what people say, Kavaraba, the Kavazuta, Min Gidar, Va'azil l'shol, u'mishal l'tarmud, u'mitarmud l'mishan, u'mishan l'harpanya. So the Gemara says, this is what Rava said. If you look at Rashi, Kavaraba v'kavazuta, Efa gidola ve'efa kitana. Sometimes you have a large measurement, a small measurement, and ultimately, again, kind of they all combine and snowball together. I'm sorry for some of the background noise. Remember, they should just have a refuah shalema. So the idea over here is sometimes you start with a small measure, a large measure, they combine, and it's almost like describing a snowball effect. Because the Gemara says you have a kavaraba, kavazuta, Baruch Hashem, kavaraba, kavazuta, min gadar va'azal l'shol, misha'ol l'tarmud, tarmud l'mishan, u'bimishan l'harpanya. So again, this genealogical unfitness began in one place and eventually snowballed, going from place to place to place to place. Which, by the way, also an incredible musar, which is when you don't deal with your problems, they snowball, right? So what started out as a relatively contained issue with Avdei Shlomo snowballs, goes on from city to city to city to city until ultimately, again, ends up, it appears in Mishan, Talmud, Harpanya. Okay, we'll say incredible. Hadrun alach, chameshes enoshim. Mazel tov to the conclusion of the parak. We'll say now back to Yibum a little bit. So actually, we're going to pick up with one of the cases that we're familiar with. It's from the first Mishnah. Keitzad ishes achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. So I will say this is the case of a brother. The lashon that they use are brothers who were not alive at the same time. So let me illustrate this case first outside. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry. Let me first illustrate this case First, illustrate this case in a simple way. Two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Right? So what happens now? So Reuven married to two women, Rachel, Leah. No erva. We're done with erva. Everybody's happy. Everything's good. So what happens? So Reuven passes away. Reuven's married to Rachel and Leah. After Reuven passes away, so he has a brother Shimon. After he passes away, they have another brother, Levi. Okay, another brother, Levi. Good. So I will say, now Levi was never alive at the same time that Reuven was. Okay? So Shimon does Yibum with Rachel. Shimon happens to have another wife, Miriam. Okay, Levi's born, Levi grows up. Shimon dies. Shimon now dies without children. So that means two wives, Rachel and Miriam, fall to Levi. So the problem is, Levi can't do Yibum with Rachel. Why not? Because Rachel was the wife originally of Reuven, and ultimately, again, remember, married Shimon through Yibum, and Levi was never alive at the same time that Reuven was. They were non-concurrent brothers. So because of that, because Levi, the brother who was born after the death of Reuven, can't do Yibum with Rachel, who was the wife that Shimon died after Reuven passed away. Therefore, again, Levi is precluded from doing Yibum with either of Shimon's widows, both Rachel and Miriam, which I will say falls into the klal of the first Mishnah, which was essentially, once you're precluded from doing Yibum with one of the wives, once she becomes, we'll call it an erva type, not really an erva, but precluded from Yibum, her tzara, her co-wife, becomes precluded from Yibum as well. That's the case of Eishes Achav Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, non-concurrent brothers. So let's take a look. So Ketzad Eishes Achav Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, what's the case of non-concurrent brothers? Shnei Achim Umeis Echad Mehem. You have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven died. And what happens? Then after the death of Reuven, another brother, Levi, is born. So both say, now after Levi's born, Yavam Hasheni as Eishes Achiv. So both say, so now what happens? Afterwards, Shimon does Yibum with one of Reuven's wives. We called her Rachel. Okay. Then what happens? We'll say, Umeis, and then ultimately Shimon dies. So what's the halacha? Harishona yotza mishum eishes achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. So obviously Levi can't do Yibum with Rachel because ultimately Rachel was the wife of Reuven, and Levi was not alive at the same time that Reuven was alive. So he can't do Yibum with Rachel because again, Rachel's still connected to Reuven. Reuven is still connected to Reuven, and Levi and Reuven are not concurrent brothers. Vashniya mishum tzarasa, and ultimately, again, Miriam, who was Shimon's other wife, also can't do Yibum with Levi. Why not? Because again, she's the tzara, she is the co-wife of Rachel, and because Rachel is precluded from doing Yibum, she is precluded as well. Vashniya mishum tzarasa asa b'ma'amar umeis. So I will say, what happens halacha l'maisa? In the same case, Reuven passes away, Levi is born, Shimon didn't yet do Yibum with Rachel. But what does he do? He does ma'amar. So we spoke about the idea ma'amar is kind of like this rabbinic betrothal when it comes to Yibum. It doesn't really affect anything, but it's kind of like a quasi-kiddushin. So he does ma'amar. He never did Yibum with her. He never did Yibum with Rachel. He just did ma'amar with her. Umeis. And then ultimately, again, then Shimon dies. So Rabbi says, so in this case, interestingly enough, Shimon has a wife, Miriam. He did ma'amar with Rachel, but didn't actually do Yibum with her. Then he dies. So what's the halacha? So Umeis. So Rabbi says, obviously Levi can't do Yibum with Rachel because she is the wife, she is the widow of his non-concurrent brother of Reuven. What about Miriam? Shnia choletzes v'lo misyabemes. We make Levi do chalitz. Yevamos say, technically speaking, Levi should be able to do Yibum with Miriam because Miriam is not the co-wife of Rachel. Because remember again, Shimon has not yet done Yibum with her. But nevertheless, we make Levi do chalitza with Miriam. Again, we'll get into all of these cases in Meretz Hashem. But actually a relatively straightforward case. So Amr of Nachman, mandatani rishon lo mishtabesh, mandatani shniya lo mishtabesh. So I'll say, interesting. There are two versions. In our Mishnah, we call when Shimon, the second brother, dies, we call Rachel, who is the wife who he married, we call her the Rishona, the first wife. In an alternate version of this, some call her the second wife. So the Gemara says, Amrav Nachanan, Mandatani Rishona la Mishtabish, Mandatani Shni la Mishtabish. The truth is, either way, whether they call the first wife or the second wife, they're both correct. So the Gemara says, how so? Mandatani Rishona, the one who calls her the first wife, Amad Beis, Lo Mishtabish, is not mistaken. Why? My Rishona. Rabbi say, what does it mean when you call her the first wife? Rishona, my Rishona, Rishona Linefila. It means ultimately, again, she was the first wife to fall in Yibum. Rashi says, Rishona Linefila, Shenafla Rishona Liyibum, Kodemes Zuba Pam Rishona. So I will say, ultimately, again, remember, because in this case, Rachel fell for Yibum when Ruvain passed away. Shimon did Yibum with her. Then Shimon dies. Now Rachel falls for Yibum, right? She falls for Yibum again, but she's the first wife who fell for Yibum. Miriam also falls for Yibum now, but Lemaisa, Rachel was the first wife to fall for Yibum. Okay, and the one who calls Rachel the second wife is also not a mistake. My Shnia the Nisuin. She was the second wife to marry Shimon. Rashi says, shal sheni shu haya nasui kvar ha'achera kishnaf lo zos lefanam. Otherwise it calls Rachel the second one because ultimately Shimon was married to Miriam before he was married to Rachel. Okay? To which the Gemara says, Milo askinan the yavam ba'achra kach kines. But how do you know? How do you know that's the case? Maybe the case is where Shimon, the first woman he marries, is Yibum to Rachel, and then afterwards he marries Miriam. The Gemara says, Elamai shnia b'nisuin. You're right. Rather, what does shnia mean? Shnia means ultimately, again, that she's married twice. Now, perhaps it calls Rachel the shnia because she's married twice. She was first married to Ruvain, and now she's married to Shimon. Okay, so both say the point over here that the Gemara is making is that if you see alternate versions where they call Rachel the Yibum wife, right? Rachel, the widow of Ruvain who marries Shimon, sometimes you'll see her referred to when Shimon dies. In that case, you'll see her referred to as wife number 1. Sometimes you'll see her referred to as wife number 2. The point that the Gemara is making is either way, the designation makes sense. Beautiful. To which the Gemara says, let's go back to the source now. Eishes achiv shelo haya ba'olamo heicha ksiva. They both say, from where do we know the case of Eishes achiv shelo haya ba'olamo? How do I know that in this case, where Levi is born after the death of Ruvain, right? So there's two brothers, Ruvain and Shimon. Ruvain dies, Shimon is there. Levi is born afterwards. How do I know that Levi has no sheikhas to Yibum with Ruvain's widows? How do I know that? To the point where we'll say, by the way, that even after Shimon does Yibum with Rachel, Ruvain's widow, if Shimon subsequently dies without children, Levi still can't do Yibum with Rachel because Rachel is still called, or initially still called, not just Shimon's widow, but Ruvain's widow as well. How do I know that because Levi was not alive at the same time as Ruvain, that he's totally precluded from Yibum with any woman connected with Ruvain? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you. So the Gemara says, Heichel ksiva, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Amar Kra, ki yeshvu achim yachtov. The pasuk says, when brothers literally again dwell together. What does this mean? Shahaisa lahem yeshiva achas ba'olam. It means they were alive together in the world. That's what it means. In order to go ahead and do Yibum, you have to be alive at the same time in this world. Prat le'ishes achav shelo haya ba'olamo. So ultimately, we'll say to teach us, Levi, who was never alive, it's not kieshu achim yachtav. He never was alive at the same time that Ruvain was. Therefore, he's precluded from Yibum. So the Gemara says, the Gemara goes right to Yachtov. What about the pasuk Yachtov? Right? Miyuchadim benachala. It means brothers who share an inheritance, which means pratli achiv min ha'im. It comes to exclude maternal brothers. It will say the same way that it's only if you share a father that you share an nachalot, share an inheritance. So it has to be paternal brothers. So we'll say it's actually very interesting. So two things learned out from this pasuk. Yeshvu teaches me that in order to be subject to Yibum, the brothers have to be alive at the same time. And Yachtov teaches me that ultimately they're together, meaning they would inherit the same way, i.e. they are paternal brothers. Incredible. So Rabba says, Achin min ha'av yoliv ach va'ach min Yaakov. So Rabba says, no. The way we learn out that they have to be paternal brothers for Yibum, interestingly enough, is actually a gzeira shava of achva achva. Literally, the term brothers from Bnei Yaakov, from the sons of Yaakov. What does it say? Ma'ala halon min ha'av. So we'll say the pasuk says, by the sons of Yaakov. Rashi says over here, it says ultimately, ki yeshu achim, shneim asar achim anachnu. So we'll say, so by the brothers, actually, when they're talking to Yosef, before Yosef revealed his identity, the Shvatim revealed themselves as 12 brothers. So it uses the Lashon Achim over here by the Shvatim, and it used the Lashon of Achim by Yibum, just like by the Shvatim. They were paternal brothers, not maternal brothers, right? Well, some of them were maternal brothers also, but they were paternal brothers. So too over here, Ki yeshvu Achim Yachdov refers to, by Yibum, refers to paternal brothers. So the Gemara says, Ma lahalon mina avalo mina aim, afkan mina avalo mina aim. Just like by the brothers, the sons of Yaakov, they are paternal brothers. So too, again, halach lamaiseh by Yibum, when it uses the lashon of Achim, that refers to paternal brothers. Why not go ahead and write the pasuk says ervas eshes achicha, right? It says the word achicha by erva as well. So why not learn out from erva to ach by yibum? Now remember again, by erva, there's an isser erva even with people who you are maternally related to. Why not say therefore again that ach of erva teaches us that ach by yibum also applies to maternal relatives? Donin achim me'achim ve'in donin achim me'achicha. I will say again, we would rather make a gzeira shava of achim achim. You see again, by Yibum and by the sons of Yaakov, it's the same word, Achim Achim, as opposed to by Yibum and Erva. By Erva, it's Achicha. By Yibum, it's Achim. So we'd rather make a Gzer Shav of Achim Achim, Yibum to Bnei Yaakov, than ultimately Yibum to Erva, where it's the similar words. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. You don't need exact words. My nafkamina, Chatan de Rabbi Shmuel, v'shava koin uba koin uba say by tzaras habayis. By tzaras habayis, right? When a house is stricken with leprosy, with tzaras. So we make a gzeira shava between the time that the kohen initially goes in to inspect and ultimately again when he returns to inspect. Now we make that gzeira shava equating the two processes, even though the Torah uses a dissimilar word, v'shav uba. The point the Gemara is making over here is you can make a gzeira shava even if words are not exactly the same. So what's the problem over here? Why can't you make a gzeira shava between Yibum and Arayos? By Yibum it says Achim, by Arayos it says Achicha, and use that to teach me that Yibum applies even to maternal brothers. To which the Gemara says, Hani mili hecha deleka midi didamila, aval hecha diiki midi didamila, mididami la yalfinon. To which the Gemara says, you're right. You don't have to use similar words. But if you have similar words, that's obviously the preferred drasha. So I will say, here's what I have. I have the word Achim by Yibum, I have the word Achim by the sons of Yaakov, and I have the word Achicha by Arayos. So now, while it's true that I don't need similar words or exact words in order to make a drasha, when you have a choice between making a gzeira shava, ultimately, again, with something that's exactly the same versus something that's similar, I'm going to go with exactly the same. Therefore, the Gemara says we're going to make the gzeira shava between Yibum and the sons of Yaakov. Just like the Achim by Yaakov, they are paternal brothers, so too the Achim by Yibum are paternal brothers as well. So far, said we have Achim teaching me paternal brothers, or Yachtov teaching me paternal brothers. We have Ki yeshvu teaching me that they have to be alive at the same time. So the Gemara says, V'leilev achva achva milot. Interesting. Why not learn out achva from Lot, brother from Lot? T'chsiv ki anoshim achim anachnu. That was say again, so here you see pasuk. Lot says to Avraham Avinu, we are achim. Remember, Lot was Abraham's nephew. So maybe now we've just widened the Yibum pool, right? And maybe again, halach l'maisa, look at Rashi for just a moment. Ki ha'ashim anachnu v'tisyabim eshes achi aviv. Maybe you should even have to do Yibum with your father's brother's wife. In other words, he uses the word Achim by Lot. Lot calls Avram his brother, but it's his uncle. So maybe Yibum extends even to your father's brother's wife, to your aunt. To which the Gemara says, Mistabra, mibnei Yaakov havile lemelef mishum demifni. So ultimately, Rabbi say, no. There's another reason. By the sons of Yaakov, Rabbi say, that word Achim is mufni. It's open. It's extra. It's extraneous. It's unnecessary. Why? So the Gemara said, listen to this. The Gemara says, Mida havile lemichtav shneim asar avadecha b'nei avinu. The pasuk could have just said, Your 12 servants. Remember, this is the brothers talking to Yosef. Bnei Avinu, the sons of our father. Why does it have to say achim? Why does it have to say brothers? Shma mina la'afnuye. Ultimately, again, the Torah puts it there because it's for a drasha purpose. It is there dafka to make a. In other words, the word is extra. So whenever you see a word that's extra, it's there to create. It's there to create a drasha. What's the drasha? The drasha ultimately again is achim from Bnei Yaakov ultimately to Yibum. Halacha l'maisa teach me that to teach me that halacha l'maisa that Yibum only applies with paternal brothers. V'yitzrich lemichtav achim, v'yitzrich lemichtav yachtov. The truth is, you need both achim and you need yachtov. I'll tell you, and I will say both of them seem to teach the same thing, right? Achim teaches me that Yibum only applies to paternal brothers. Yachtov, the Gemara went to say that it's only people who inherit the same way, which are paternal brothers. Why do I need both? Here we go. Because had the Torah just written Achim, you might have thought that you could learn out Achim Gzir Shava from Lot, and that would even tell you that there's even Yibum with your aunt, your father's brother's sister. V'chitema lo mufni. And maybe you'll say, but that word is not extra, it's not open for drasha. Lo yafnuye mipnei midahava Loi afnuye mifnei. It really is open for a drasha. Why? Midahava lemichtav reim uksiv achim shma mina laafnuye. Because Lot could have said reim. He could have said we are close, we're friends. But he uses achim. Torah didn't need to use that word. The fact that the Torah uses that word would seem to free it up for drasha purposes. Therefore, kasav rachmana yachtov hamiyuchad benachla. So it's interesting. The drasha of achim by itself is not an ironclad drasha, because as much as you have achim by the sons of Yaakov, which tells you paternal brothers, you also have achim by Lot, which would even say your father's brother's wife. Therefore, you need yachtov to solidify the drasha. Only brothers who inherit together, i.e. paternal brothers. Because of Rachmana yachtov, and had the Torah just said yachtov, havamina demiyachde ba'aba ube'ima. I would have thought maybe yachtov means that dafka they share Yibum only applies to brothers who share the same father and mother. Therefore, again, tzricha. Therefore, we'll say achim from Yaakov comes to teach us that halacha l'maisa is just paternal brothers. I v'ha mehechatisi Yibum benachla tala rachmana benachla mina'av v'lo mina'im. So the Gemara says, but one second, how would you assume that? Yibum is fundamentally tethered to inheritance, as we will see. And inheritance only comes from a father. Right? Inheritance is determined by a paternal relationship and not from the mother. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but itrich sakadait chamina hoil v'chidushu the kamishteri erva gabe. You're right. I would have thought, even though normally halacha l'maisa, so we know that Yibum is tethered to nachala, to ultimately to inheritance, and inheritance comes from the father. Halacha l'maisa, I would have thought that because Yibum is so unique. Why is it unique? It permits an erva, right? It permits an otherwise prohibited relationship. So I might have thought dafka only applies to brothers who share both a father and a mother, to which the Gemara says stricha. Therefore, I need both drashas. So we'll say it turns out from this sugya, interestingly enough, that the way what we're learning out is as follows. So first, remember, this whole discussion got started with concurrent brothers. Eishes achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. So how do I know that Levi, who's the brother who is born after Reuven passes away, how do I know that he's not shaykh at all to Yibum, anything to do with any woman ever married in any way to Reuven? Ki yeshvu achim yachtov. They have to have a yeshiva together. If they haven't lived at the same time, ultimately, again, the brother who was born after the death of the first brother, in this case is Levi, who was born after the death of Reuven, no shaykhs to Yibum. But now, we'll say we're beginning to kind of build this out, this Yibum construct a little bit. Furthermore, what else do we learn? Yibum only applies to brothers who have the same paternity. Two drashas. Yachtov, they're together.